Hi you guys, it's Tonya Gibbs, and today I'm going to do a start to finish mixed media card using random scraps found on my desk. I have pulled out several of the dies and things from my scrap pile, and then I have this bucket on my desk that holds little knickknacks, leftover flowers from packaging and things like that. So to give you a rundown, I have some fibers and some laces and seam binding that were in the bowl, and then I also have some little flowers and things like that. These were remnants left over from packages of projects that I had finished. I also have pulled out some hymnal pages that were just scraps where I had die cut some other things out of them. I love to use these on my pages. They have the music in some spots and then the hymnal words. I also have this little piece of tissue paper. I don't end up using it, but it's nice to pull it out and have everything where you need it. So you can kind of get a feel for what's going on. Then from the scrap pile, I have cut out some of the leafy branch die from Die-Namite Dies and also the spring doily from Die-Namite Dies. And I have sentiment here that was in my stash that I used on a piece of scrap. So everything was cut from scrap, everything came from the scrap pile. I've also pulled out a little bit of tulle. I've pulled out some stamps from Stampers Anonymous. This is the grunge set from Tim Holtz, and then the small distress ink, and then this is a stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. So I'm going to start out with a card. My base, when I do mixed media, I like to pre-cut my base and then I adhere it to my base card. So I've cut this, my final card size is going to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, so I've cut this a 1/4 of an inch smaller, so it's 4 inches by 5 1/4. And the tip for the doily is this doily was actually cut from a piece of paper left over in a 6x6 pad where the white was the back of the paper, and it's a great way to use up those little tiny pieces of paper that, you know, maybe if you don't like the pattern or you just want to get rid of that little 6x6 pad. Now I'm going to start out with the antique linen distress ink around the edges, and it's very wet because they're new pads, so I'm just taking that cosmetic sponge and just working those edges into the cardstock so they're not too wet. Now I am going to start playing around with some layering and decide what I want to do. I realized that the doily is rather large for this cut, so I want to make sure that if I add some layering in the top and the bottom there that I can see it through the doily. So I'm going to just rip up my hymnal pages into these little small pieces, and I'm going to be cognizant of where the placement of my doily will be when I start to glue these down. I'm just going to grab some matte medium and some gesso out to add those on. The matte medium that I grabbed was a little dried out, so it was hard to work with, but everything must get used in this room. So I end up using my finger with it instead of a brush, I think, because it was too clumpy and I couldn't get it to spread. And the nice thing about mixed media is that things don't have to be neat. In fact, they have more character if they're not neat. So these clumps that were in here, I just, by smoothing them out with my finger, you know, it was fine for mixed media. You don't even see half of it. So then what I do to the top, I always try to do in a diagonal to the bottom because I like symmetry. So I typically try to do the same thing to one side as I do to the other. And again, just rubbing some of that matte medium in, and like I said, it was at the end of the barrel, so it was hard to spread sometimes. So now I'm going to play with the placement of my doily, and I can still see the peekabooing out. I don't need to see the whole thing to know it's there. I just need a little bit. So I'm going to take my ATG gun, which is always unthreaded when you need it, right? So I add the doily down, and then I start building out some layers. I think I pull out the stencil and decided to go ahead and stencil out some of those little dots that are on there. I love the stencil because these are all those grunge pieces that you always want, and there's, you get so many different designs in this one stencil. So I'm just taking the cosmetic sponge and working that in. The color on that is called the Picked Raspberries. So it's a really bright, bright pink. So as you can see, things are really starting to come together. Now I'm going to take my Mowed Lawn Distress ink, and I really thought these leaves, they were cut from a piece of scrap green paper, and it was just a little too spruce looking. So by adding the Mowed Lawn Distress ink to it, it kind of brightened it up a little bit. And then the more I started thinking about it, I was like, ooh, what if we did the gold on it like we did the leaves on the tag that I shared last week on my blog? For those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you need to check out my blog because I often have projects there that I don't share on YouTube. So I'm using my Versa ink and I'm just hitting random spots of this the dye. And again, this is the Leafy Branch dye from Die-Namite Dyes. And this is the Queen's Gold from Ranger. And I'm just spritzing it on, and I'm not being super careful because I really don't want a pattern on these leaves. I want them to just look like they've been kissed with gold. So I'm going to heat that up really fast, and you can just really see how it gives a lot of texture to those leaves. And they're going to work beautifully. So I'm just making sure everything's dry that's on my surface and wiping off all the residue from the embossing powder. And now I'm going to pull one of those grunge stamps off and ink it with the coffee archival ink. This is the one with the numbers on it. You're not really going to see it too much in the final card, but it does help to give a little bit of texture to that background that's so stark. Now it's time to really think about how I'm going to blend all of these different colors together. So I pulled out some of my Tattered Angel sprays, and I'm going to use, this is the Rum Raisin and the Wheat Fields. And those two, whenever you spritz it all together, it's going to just make everything kind of blend and just start working together. So pardon my hand, I've got a new camera angle and I'm still trying to get used to where things go. But now everything is starting to look like it belongs together. So it's time to start building out my layers, and I get to looking at it and I'm like, oh, I just need one more bit of texture. It just needs a little more texture. So I grab out the stencil again and decide to use the dots that's there in the center and put some gesso on there. I don't know, it just kind of felt like it needed a little more depth. Now this is a surface prep gesso, but I had mixed it with a full body gesso, so it is runny, but it's not as runny as it would be if I used it straight from the surface prep. So you can't really see the definitions of the dots, but again, by the time I add layers and layers on this, it won't matter anyway. And again, I'm just going to heat it up one more time. Now, once this was dry, I was looking at it going, it's just too white again. So I added more of the wheat fields and dried it again. And, you know, it's just so free. It took me, in real time, it took me about 30 minutes to make this card. I had no plan. I just sat down and started putting it together. The only plan I had was to use the supplies on my desk. And I have this flower that was a Jolie's flower. And I hit it with the rum raisin to just kind of pull everything together. And then I fell in love with it instantly. I just took a baby wipe, wiped off the pearl so it would stay you know, clean. And then I took the Leafy Branch die and I cut it down into smaller pieces. It was just a little too big for my card size. And by cutting it down like this, you can really maximize the use of it. And I'm just using a little hot glue off to the side there to add that down. And again, this time where my stamping goes from the top right to the bottom left, I'm going to build out my layers going from the top left to the bottom right. And then that way you don't cover up your stamping and you still see all those techniques and everything, but they still stay in the background. And again, I added more leaves to the top than at the bottom because I had to add my sentiment, and I didn't want the sentiment to be too crowded at the bottom. And now I'm just going to cut this down and add the little fishtails to it. When I have small pieces of scrap like this on my desk, I typically go to my stamps and start stamping out images on them. I don't try to fuss with cutting them down or anything at this point. I just am stamping them so I have them, and then I keep them in those iris containers. Again, I went back to my vintage photo, and I am going, no, excuse me, that's antique linen distress ink, and I'm just giving that a little bit of depth. And then I decided it needed some shimmer, so I added the Wheatfield's Glimmer Mist to that as well. And now I'm going to heat it up again and just set all those colors and dry it really well. And then I realized I really wanted some of this tulle in there. So before I add my sentiment, I'm just taking that tulle, cutting off a small piece of scrap, twisting it in a circle, adding a little bit of hot glue. Be very careful with this because it does like to unravel and get you. And then I'm just tucking it in. This is going to make it look more like a corsage, I think. Super fun. And I'm going to add a little bit down to the bottom as well. It's so lightweight that you don't really notice it, the tulle, but it is there, and it does add another bit of texture to your card. So now I'm looking for the lace. I put this down before I put the flower down, but I didn't, so I just decided to abandon the idea of the lace and went back to it needed a little more gold. So the gesso wasn't quite dry yet all the way, so I just sprinkled the gold directly onto the gesso and then bumped it around so it wasn't clumped up. Heat set it, and now you're going to see that that little bit of gold just really popped the whole card. I think between the gold and the purple, it just kind of made the whole card come to life. It just gave it a little bit of depth and richness, and I just love it. So I've decided to go ahead and adhere my sentiment down. I'm going to use the Scotch 3D mounting tape. This is the best 3D mounting tape. I love it. It comes on a roll so you can cut it the size you want it. So now I'm looking at my card. I'm going to evaluate whether or not I think it needs anything else, and it does to me. It's still just a little too bland. So I'm reaching up for some other flowers to see if they will work, and they don't. And then I discover that that butterfly, it was just a little too big for that big flower. And I get to looking around, and I'm like, maybe it's okay. And then, I don't know, out of nowhere I spotted this little piece of scrap on my desk. But before I did that, I was like, oh, let's add some splatters. Maybe that would help. And it did. It helped fill in some of those little holes up there, but it just still needed a little more depth. And I think now's when I realize, oh, I know what I need. I know what I need. And I start looking around, and there's these little pearls sitting around. And again, that's what this process is about. It's looking at these itty bitty pieces that you would ordinarily dismiss or throw in the trash or move on from. And these little teeny tiny elements come together to make the prettiest cards sometimes. Or, sometimes I'll make whole layouts just using scraps on my desk like this. These little teeny tiny pieces of nothing that you think are just not worth keeping, I throw in that bucket, and then once the bucket gets full, I start using them. Then I spot the scrap. That's where this is a postage stamp. It's just a piece of remnant left over off of one of Marion's paper collections, and I didn't glue it down because I wanted to make sure that that's where I wanted it to go. And if I put one thing on one side, I had to put something on the other, so I decided to go with the tag, and then I ripped it down, and then I'm adding that residual ink off of that blending tool. Decided the tag was staying. I really liked the look of the tag. So then, well, if I leave the tag, I got to leave the postage stamp. So I tucked it in down at the bottom left. And you know what? This is how you use up little pieces of things. This is real time. This is me not even knowing what I want to do, just doing it. And then I was like, oh, I really like the twine. It's very organic. I didn't like that kind of slip knot, so I decided to just tie a bow. I started to use the seam binding, but thought the seam binding is kind of bulky. The twine is a little more lightweight. It gives a more organic feel to the card. So I just tied a little bow. And again, these were just little pieces of scraps on the desk. Trimmed down the little tails and added a little hot glue to adhere it down. And it just added that perfect little touch to the card. Now I'm going to take and move everything out of the way, take my wipe, make sure all of that ink is off my desk, and then I grab my card base, and the card is actually 4 1/4 by 11, so I'm going to score it at 5 1/2. And I'm using my Martha Stewart mini scoreboard. And see how now, because I did not start out building this card on the card base, I now have a nice little 1/4 inch border all the way around my card. And I also have a clean card because I don't have all that ink on the back of that one. And then I decided, oh, these edges are just a little too clean, so I grabbed my Prima Distress tool and distressed up the edges of the card just to give it a little more tattered look. It was just a little too pristine. And then at the top you can't really scrape it, so I just scraped across it. Now I'm going to add my, see, this is what my card backing would look like if I had just built this on my card back. So that's why I like to do this. And I'm just going to add a little bit of score tape here and finish off my card and then add it to my card base. Now on my mixed media cards I don't typically do anything extra on the inside. I like to write a big message when I do a card like this, especially a Mother's Day card. So I don't typically decorate the inside. I might put a butterfly or something on there when I'm writing my message, but there's our card for today. I'm going to have some high resolution images here at the back end. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this process. We have a blog hop going on over on my blog, so go check it out. I will leave a link down in the bottom. Go see if you can win some fabulous prizes from Die-Namite Dies. Oh, one more thing. I decided I wanted to add a pearl down at the bottom, but then after I pulled those out, they were just a little too big. So I abandoned the idea and just called this finished. So thanks again for watching.